Hello, and welcome to Coffee and Catholics. This week we are going to continue looking at current issues through a social justice lens. And this week we are looking at feminism and how that relates to Catholic social teaching. There is a difference between postmodern feminism and what the feminists that started the suffragettes when they started their campaigns. And I think what I always think about is I went on a tour of Molly Brown's house in Denver a couple of years ago, and there was a protest going on that day, and it had to do with reproductive rights. And my tour guide said that Molly Brown would be really proud of the women that were at the Capitol. And I didn't say anything then. Maybe I should or shouldn't, but my thoughts were no, she wouldn't have been, because Molly Brown was a devout Catholic. And her type of feminism was about getting women the vote, putting forth child labor laws, and and safety for workers. Women being visible and a part of politics, not necessarily women being viewed as the same as men. I think we've talked about in the previous podcast about the difference between equality and equity. She wanted equitable rights for women, and I think that that's changed a lot in the modern days, where women are almost trying to be like men. And we're going to kind of look at that through the social justice lens about how we can still want rights for women without changing what it means to be a woman.
The two social justice themes that we will be kind of viewing this through the lens of would be rights and responsibilities. The Catholic tradition teaches that human dignity can be protected and a healthy community can be achieved only if human rights are protected and responsibilities are met. Therefore, every person has a fundamental right to life and a right to those things required for human decency. Corresponding to these rights are duties and responsibilities to one another, to our families, and to the larger society. And then also the theme of solidarity. We are one human family, whatever our national, racial, ethnic, economic, and ideological differences. We are our brothers and sisters' keepers wherever they may be. Loving our neighbor has global dimensions in a shrinking world. At the core of the virtue of solidarity is the pursuit of justice and peace. Pope Paul VI taught that if you want peace, work for justice. The gospel calls us to be peacemakers. Our love for all our brothers and sisters demands that we promote peace in a world surrounded by violence and conflict. And those come from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops website.
Yeah, Stacy, you mentioned like the postmodern feminism and the original feminism. And from what I understand, there's like 5 or 6 different waves of feminism. And I don't understand any of them. Like, I can't tell you what wave is what wave and what they all mean and whatnot. But I do know that I think you're right that in the current wave of feminism that we have now, it's very much about, I find it to be a very weird dynamic of an ideology that tells you that men are, for lack of a better word, like almost evil, like that they're bad people or whatever, but also at the same time trying to be men, like you were talking about in terms of like shunning motherhood in a way or whatever, saying that, motherhood isn't or raising a home and, being a part of that family or taking care of that home isn't as important as having a career and attaining those things that I guess more historically men have attained. And I know that when I was going through college, I was very much that way. Like, and it came from, like, and I think maybe it comes for a lot of women. It came from being hurt by men, and I think as a general rule, people tend to generalize about people. So if you're hurt by somebody of a certain demographic, like, a male hurt you, then you kind of generalize, like, all men suck. And that's very much how I felt about it. But, like, I was, if a man opened a door for me, I was so offended, because then that must mean that he thought that I wasn't strong enough to open up my own door. Like, it never crossed my mind that maybe he was just trying to be a gentleman and being respectful. So I've been on both sides of the spectrum, being a very pro-choice, almost anti-man kind of feminist, who I am now, and I don't even really identify as like a feminist. Like, I don't see myself as a feminist at all. Do y'all see yourselves as feminists?
I do, absolutely. And I think if you look, I think you made a really great point, Stacy. The origins of feminism were about women being given the opportunity to affect public discourse, to have an influence over policy decisions, to be able to play a part and to bring that feminine genius to the managing and growing and building of this country in its early days. And what has gone on, and originally, if you look through history, and I said this in a talk that I gave recently, if you look through history, when it comes to people leading the charge against freeing the marginalized and improving the rights for those who don't have rights, or setting free the oppressed, women have always led the charge in these types of things. And so what feminism was designed to do was to give women the ability to do these good things for society and to bring that feminine influence to bear so that we could send the society in a better direction for the good of others. And what has evolved over the past few decades is that feminism, the public agenda, and that's going to be important that I say that for what I say next, the public agenda of feminism has shrunk to maybe 2 to 3 major pillars. And it's gone from women being able to have equal say in the public arena and equal rights to women being able to do whatever they want to whomever they want, and anyone be damned who stands in my way. Now, that is a very different discourse than what the original feminists set out to accomplish, or what they believed, or what they represented. And I find this interesting because this change started to really become visible. It was already happening in about the 60s and 70s as media began to become a major culture-shaping power in this country. And I find that very curious and coincidental, because if you look at media in the current feminist agenda, the modern feminist agenda, which centers strongly mostly around rights over human sexuality, over a woman's sexuality or her reproductive rights, these two pillars, which generally tend to be with various iterations, abortion and free access to birth control. Abortion on demand, birth control on demand are the two giant pillars around which all the ancillary issues circle. And this is the narrative that has been peddled down to us and distilled throughout the country for the last 40, 50 years, maybe even longer. But it's interesting that this narrowing of the agenda started as media, as feminism depended on media to get this message out. And if you notice, media started championing around this in the 70s and 80s and started sharing this information and started distilling it to Americans. And what's interesting about this is that the media is controlled by men, not by women. So if you follow this rabbit hole that I'm going down here, which is very deep and dark, of the top 100 media companies in this country, 30 of them employ no women at all in position of power. So basically you have men distilling, shaping, and editing the feminist narrative and then dispensing it. And I don't think it's coincidental that the two pillars of modern feminism, which center around abortion on demand and birth control on demand, are not things that are good for women. Those are things that are good for irresponsible and selfish men. Because men are not being held accountable, and they're being told that they don't have well, they're not being told, but when you allow abortion on demand and birth control on demand, and you demand that the government pays for it, then men do not have to step up and take responsibility for who they're having sex with and when and what if a child issues from that. So I just think it's really interesting that the feminine agenda in this country is one that is completely and entirely crafted and distilled by men and not by women. And I think that that's really something that we need to wake up to as women and start trying to distill and figure out what we need to do to take back the narrative just as women, first of all. And then as Catholic women, we need to do what we're all supposed to be doing in our lives every day, which is bringing the gospel and the magisterium and the truths of the church to bear on the issues affecting our generation. That's why we were born. So now we have to figure out how to do that. How to A, take back the narrative, and B, bring the gospel to bear on the answer to these real issues that need to be solved and strategized about.
And when you mention about how those things benefit men, it also made me think back when we did our body image series about when we talked about sex trafficking and pornography, and how those two agendas help those industries as well. And I just think that's, when we're talking about what's good for women, I don't think that anybody would say that sex trafficking is good for anybody. The type of mentality helps those things in those dark areas continue.
When we say people should be able to watch whatever they want, who is that really benefiting? Follow the money, so to speak. Follow the power.
I will say that I think what you just said was very eloquent in what you said, Lauren. I don't think I could say it better. But I will say that I think that it's not just for men who want to act irresponsibly. I think there's also a lot of women out there who
definitely want
to be able to, have sex with whoever they want to and be able to get out of responsibility. And I don't think that there are I think there are many, many women. I'm not saying that everybody who has an unplanned pregnancy and or gets an abortion are people who are irresponsible. But I do think that there are definitely people out there, and I've known women before who they just don't care. I do find that interesting, because when you're talking about like the body image, like that's one thing in our society that has just bothered the daylights out of me. I used to be somebody who, like, I realize this is very silly, but like I would see images of women, and they, you get attention, and you get like the good attention if you're wearing things that are attractive. So, like in college, I would wear kind of low-cut shirts, and I would wear, tight-fitting jeans, and even high school and stuff like that. And I really wanted men to see me and think that I was attractive. This is where the contradiction came in that I was a very oxymoronic kind of feminist. Like, I would get angry with men if they looked at me, but I wanted them to look at me, if that makes sense. So, and now, like, I think after becoming Catholic and really seeing what our bodies are supposed to be for and what they are made for, like, I want to look good for my husband. I don't want other people to think I look good. Like, I don't want to look, like horrible or anything, but I don't want to try to attract that kind of attention. And I think in our society, I mean, it's everywhere. Like in every TikTok video that you see, like that I've seen recently of women, it's all about how can I look sexy in front of the camera. Or like in movies, it's so much of it is women in the nude or partial nudity or whatever, or something like that. And I just find it so sad, because we're not just our bodies, and women complain so often about men taking advantage of them and using them, but we as women in our society are putting ourselves out there to be used by men. Whoever wants to use our bodies just for their own pleasure. And just because it's on camera doesn't mean, or just because they're not touching us or whatever, doesn't mean that somebody isn't using us because they're looking at us as a commodity when we do that to ourselves, when we objectify ourselves. And our society is all about objectifying women. And so,
I think you made a good point about when you use the word being used. because I think a lot of times when this type of conversation comes up, some people tune out because they're like, oh, those Catholics are very prudish. Don't they know sex is fun?
Yes, we do. Have you seen our family size?
And so, but there's a difference between, and I think we talked about this too back on our pornography, because there's a difference. There's that line that you cross when you are in a loving relationship with somebody and then you're using somebody. And so, and that, right here, right there in the rights and responsibilities, it says that there's a fundamental right to life and a right to those things required for human decency. We're not made to be used by somebody. We talk about human rights all the time. We talked about child labor in third world countries and things like that. We know at the core that we don't use people, because if we're going to show somebody some human decency, then we have to view them as who they are, not as a thing to be used.
And I want to make a point to comment something on like what Alisha said. We're not saying that if you have been in an abusive relationship, or you have had something has happened to you, and it's not saying that it's because of something you've worn, or because, want to make a point and say that is not what we're saying here, or what Alisha was saying. That's not what what was being meant by that. Just having respect for your own body and does not, like you were talking about how, like, if when you wore a low cut shirt, you were trying to get that attention, but also not. But that doesn't mean if you're trying to get the attention, that doesn't mean like if somebody had taken advantage, that it was your fault.
Oh yeah.
So I want to just make a point that we are not.
Clarified.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I have had this conversation with people before when I've said, I don't think that it's. I don't think that in terms of how women ought to dress and stuff, that we ought to be wearing super low cut shirts with showing off our bellies and whatever, and
but we also don't all have to
short shorts. But then they're saying, well, if a man takes it a step further and assaults a woman or whatever, you're saying it's their fault. No, absolutely not.
Absolutely.
If you wear something that is provocative or whatever, you are wearing that thing, and if somebody looks at you, then they look at you or whatever, you are putting yourself out there to receive a certain type of attention. But if a man or whoever crosses a line to actually, acting in a way that is inappropriate, or by assaulting you or whatever, that is his fault.
Right.
That absolutely 100% is his fault, and he ought not do that, no matter what a woman is wearing, no matter where she is at night. You can put yourself in a situation that is probably not the best situation to be put in. But if somebody crosses that line, that is their doing, not your fault. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I would take it a step further to let's move the conversation beyond clothing.
Yeah.
To why are we talking about clothing? This is the conversation that the people curating this message want us to have. We need to stop talking about the things they want us to talk about and look at why we are letting them tell us what to talk about. The question we need to ask is why we're discussing what we're wearing at all, and why we aren't discussing why it is that everything centers around how the male responds to the woman. Why is that the conversation when it should be centering around the dignity of women? And I think that's where modern feminist has departed. Feminism has departed from original feminism. The original discussion was about how women can impact society for good, and it has been deconstructed to what women do, wear, say, how they act in public, how they act towards men. And that's what I would like to see shift, to move completely away from what a woman is doing to what we can do to impact society as Catholic feminists, and what the narrative needs to change. We need to take it back. It doesn't need to be about what women are doing. It needs to be about what can we do to empower women to do better and to do more? What can we give back to women, rather than allowing the narrative to be shaped by what what the media thinks we should talk about, or even what books that we read should talk about. Original feminism was about impacting the world for good. And I don't think that any of those women would have reduced it to a man looking at me. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that's the problem with feminism today, is that it's become so shrunken down and so cut down that it's just this small, tiny narrative, when really all the real battles are just being ignored. Like, we're talking about, well, we want abortion on demand, and we want birth control on demand, and we want an end to misogyny. Well, that's not going to happen because men are men, and we can't control other people's thoughts. But what we can control is the narrative around feminism.
I think that you made a point there about, like, when you brought up, like, that we're not going to be able to change misogyny. But I think that what's important is, like, we do, like you said, we're changing the narrative and changing that, how can we empower women? And men need to be doing the same thing. Catholic men, I know that there are so many different things for Catholic men and men and children to build them up, and that needs to be happening along with this. Just our whole society, Catholics building up our other Catholics and becoming, really going back to what God made us for. God made us in his image, male and female. He created them, not he created male, he in his image, not he created female in his image, but both together. And there are ways that we all reflect God, and pulling that together and empowering each other to grow closer to God and to become a more godly society.
And I think that's what is reflected and that's what we should be doing, is looking outward toward the same goal together, instead of discussing the little vignettes of feminism. Rather, how can men and women as a society, as Catholic men and women, work together to move the society forward, to answer the questions of the generation.
That's why I've always been hesitant to use the term feminist for myself, because I think it's such a narrowing view.
Well, it is if you follow the modern definition of it. It absolutely is.
Right. I try to, I think of like my relationship with my husband and our family, and that I have 4 boys. Like, I'm not raising up little girls. And so I have 4 boys, but I'm trying to, through our family relationship, show, teaching that equity that we talked about, and helping them to learn how to pursue, what it means to be a true Catholic, a Catholic man, and to grow in that, and to, as they are in the future, whether they get married or single, become priests, whatever that is, to try and be that example to them, and showing, how we need to live as, that's, our families are that first society.
I think you're right. I think the whole point is that we have become divided over something that never should have divided us.
Right.
And that we're trying to rectify some of the sins of the past against the marginalized and against women in particular. But that it's been so reduced to these narrow things, where more worthy battles like equal pay and paid maternity leave and all kinds of things like this, we haven't made a lot of progress in those. Well, the way we should have.
Well, I'm gonna say it. And we haven't made those leaps in the Catholic Church either.
Right.
When you talk about maternity leave and
it's everywhere.
When you talk about child care, and these are societal issues, and as Catholics, we should be leading the way. I don't know how many times I've heard my modern feminist friends say, well, okay, you Catholics, or a lot of times they'll use political parties, are all about, because I'm like, no, Catholics this, but anyways, they'll talk about how, well, you're anti-abortion, but then what happens to the mom and babies afterwards? I said, well, as Catholics, we really need to be supporting moms. Us the Coffee and Catholics, we're always posting stuff about Willow pregnancy support and things like that, places like that in the Rose Home. Those are the things that we should be fighting for as women, to support other women, to build them up. and to build each other up. And that has been like another theme of this podcast, is that we are supposed to be walking with each other on a journey. And that doesn't mean to, throw Band-Aids at things, because that's really, when we really get down to it, contraception and abortion are ways of avoiding things. They are not the solution. And the solution is finding the programs and the resources that are needed to help mothers and children and to be successful, to help women find jobs that help their families thrive.
And to provide those jobs, like when you're an employer, to have, like you said, like we should be leading the charge of providing, those opportunities. And unfortunately, so many times we're not.
Well, and I know a lot of times it gets down to insurance and liability, and we don't have enough time to talk about all of that. But really, Catholic facilities should be the first ones to provide on-site childcare for their employees.
I think that's a great point. And it's one of the many ways that we could bring the truth of the gospel to bear on these problems in this generation. That's what we're here for, isn't it? I mean, all throughout history, saints dealt with the issues being presented in society and became saints because of how they interacted and became holy in the midst of that society that they were in. So bringing the gospel to solving these problems and saying, okay, but why is it that these women feel like they have no other choice, rather than, well, we can't help them all, or, well, that's what they got into, that's their responsibility. Okay, but why is it that you and I don't feel that way, but some women do? Let's address what is it that makes her feel that she has no other way out but to kill her baby. This is what we have to ask. This is what this little circle that I'm circling in this imaginary table that you can't see me making a giant circle with my finger, this is the circle Catholics need to come to and bring all of our resources to try and figure out how to make abortion unthinkable. Something that we wouldn't have to do.
A mother shouldn't have to worry that bringing another child into this world is going to mean that her other children are going to starve.
And that, as much as that seems so foreign to some of us, that is the reality for a lot of people. And contrary to what the popular narrative suggests, abortion is not just mostly done by irresponsible women. There are no statistics to support that whatsoever, no matter what you may have heard. A lot of these abortions are being performed in very poor areas where women are desperate. And we have to answer that as Catholics. Mercy goes to the lowest point, right? And yet here we are. There's plenty of Catholic ministries doing things like that. And yet here we are, and this is still a thing that we're fighting over as Catholic women.
Well, and I think also in this country, because I really do think that when we talk about feminism, a lot of times we just think about the American postmodern feminism, and there's a global. I mean, we even have, and I think we talked about this one, there are countries who are using abortion to get rid of birth defects and things like that.
Yeah, well, that's here too.
And there's countries that say we have eliminated this defect
in Denmark or Finland.
Yeah,
like that, wasn't it? Or
and
one of those Nordic. It was one of those Scandinavian countries.
And if we look at this through a social justice teaching lens, and we talk about solidarity includes a global community. And I know that seems big, and you might be going, well, I can't fix the whole world, but we can do our part in speaking about it. I think a lot of times we just, like I said, like we've been talking about, we narrow it down to my body, my choice, and yes, but if we talked about earlier, if you're in another podcast, but if your body doesn't matter, then sure, do whatever you want with it. But your body does matter. And so does the body of a baby in their mother's womb. And so does the body of a child who is starving in another country because they're in famine, or their parents can't afford enough food for everybody, or they're orphans and they're on their own. The elderly woman who is on her deathbed,
Jesus cares about
her body matters.
This one.
Everybody's body matters.
Okay. Yeah, so I think it was yesterday's Mass reading. It's from Matthew 15. And I'll just read a little short excerpt. It says, Jesus summoned his disciples and said, "My heart is moved with pity for the crowd, for they have been with me now for 3 days and have nothing to eat. I do not want to send them away hungry, for fear they may collapse on the way." And I was reading a reflection on this Bible reading, and it was talking about how this really highlights for us how our bodies do matter, because Jesus didn't only care about their salvation right then. He cared about their bodily needs right then. He wanted to make sure that they were well fed so that they could make the trip home. And so I think you're absolutely right. Like, our body is absolutely 100% matter. And when you're looking at it through a Catholic lens, you can see that through Christ's teaching, just through his humanity right there. Like, he had a human and a divine love for the bodies of those who he was preaching to.
Maybe that's what I think as feminists, because like you said, I do consider myself feminist. And I think that's where it gets down to, is that rhetoric. Yes, our body matters.
Yes, you should have agency over your body. Yes, but not license. And there's a difference.
Yes. And I think that I was at Family Formation the other day, and Father was talking about the prayer, Our Father. We were discussing the prayer, and we're talking about God's will, thy will be done. The creative tension that is created there is that God gives us free will, but that we are to surrender it back to him. So just because you can do something doesn't mean you ought to do something.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's a nice segue into, I'm going to go back to a couple of things that y'all mentioned when you were talking about kind of the demand for contraception and for abortion. And I think really in our society and in many countries, like, the acceptance and the promotion of sexual promiscuity really gives way to that demand. So what we do with our bodies does matter, because it has consequences. And again, I want to make sure that I'm being very clear with what you said. Everybody who has an abortion is not being promiscuous, and they're not being irresponsible.
Yeah, but a lot of married women have abortions.
Yes, exactly. And a lot of people in
society.
Yeah, and a lot of people in, monogamous relationships, unmarried monogamous relationships too. Mm-hmm. But I do think, and abortion's been around for a very long time, even when society didn't accept promiscuity. Exactly. And so, but I think that the fact that our society, we had that sexual revolution, and it kind of gave way to just consent is all that matters, then that has really accelerated the demand for contraception and abortion. And I will also go back to what you said. I do agree with you, Lauren, that we need to be looking at, in terms of feminism and like women's rights and all of that, from a wide lens, because there's many, many, many different issues. But when I was talking about, clothing and such like that, I think that modern feminism, what it says is that objectifying oneself is empowering. That's what it tells women. And so I think that approaching issues of objectification through like clothing and your appearance is actually really important, because I think that it needs to be said that a woman's worth is not dependent upon her appearance or how many men think she's attractive, but it's dependent. It's innate in her by the fact that she exists because God created her, because she is a child of God. And so I think refocusing the definition of worth is a large part of what we can do to redefine that narrative around feminism.
That's good. That's beautiful. Yeah, I agree with that.
Needs to be mentioned that, like, another place that we really need to be assisting other women, and these, like when we're talking about who feel like they have no other option, are women who are in abusive relationships, and they just like that desperation of feeling that fear of bringing a child will tie them further into that relationship, and just more that another way of empowering our women, or to help, that we need to, as a society, or as Catholics, need to be helping to better see that and to better provide support for women who need to get out of those sort of situations.
Well, not only that, but also like not have a stigma on women who are in abusive relationships, because I think it's like the average number of times that women leave an abusive relationship before they leave it for good is 7 times. That's a lot of times, and a lot can happen. And I think that a lot of times women who stay in abusive relationships, they get an attitude from other people like, well, you should just leave, or you're bringing it upon yourself. It is because there's a lot of emotional abuse in that, and seeing yourself that you're not worth anything more than that, and fear, and all those different complexities that go into that. So
and abuse comes in so many different it's a spectrum of of what we can see. That's like, you can, like Alisha, what you were saying, like we could see somebody like very obviously this is an abusive relationship, why are you going back, like there's that stigma type, but then also there's the unseen, and really hearing other women and believing them.
Well, and I think as Catholics too, we end up having that additional stigma of divorce, because as Catholics, in a sacramental marriage, we don't believe that what has been joined together should be separated. But if there's abuse, it probably wasn't sacramental in the first place, and I think that people need to accept that. So, like if a woman is stuck in a abusive relationship, like you were saying, we should be supportive of her taking the steps she needs to be safe for herself and for her children.
And that should be the first thing is, are you safe?
Yes.
Right. And we have to understand that it isn't the divorce always that breaks the marriage, but it is the abuse itself that makes a mockery of the sacramental union. That is what breaks the marriage to begin with. So I think we need to reframe the way we counsel women that are in these situations. And this is all part of addressing what are these underlying and generations long, and even like, I hate to use a buzzword, but systemic reasons why these things are occurring. Like, can we be brave enough to discuss it, to move past the generalities? Because it occurs to me that Catholics don't really pay attention to women unless they're asking us for something. Have you noticed that? And what I mean by that is we only pay attention to women in poverty when they are about to get an abortion and we want them to not have one. Well, why aren't we talking about their needs before that? Why aren't we going towards women in these situations, in these statistical situations that continue to repeat themselves over and over again? Why aren't we going ahead of the game there and trying to change the narrative for her in her own life?
And I think there are groups that are there are people that are doing that. We don't want to say that there aren't people doing that. Like there's some great organizations and great people out there who are taking those steps. But as a whole, we should do it.
Well, and I think
and we need to do it as individuals.
We talked about a lot too about catechesis, because I think that sometimes what somebody was taught from before, I think we've started to do a better job as a church to get more in depth into what our faith actually means. I don't think it's always been that way, and so it's been hard to break some of those chains, if that makes any sense.
Alisha, I feel like you were trying to say something, and I keep talking over you.
I'm good. Well, and I was thinking about Annie, and this might just be me, but when you were talking about like women in abusive relationships or who have been abused, and you said we ought to believe them, it was a bit of a buzzword for me, but it made me think about the #MeToo movement. And how everything was all about believe women all the time. And I found that so, I don't know the correct word for it, but I didn't have a good feeling about it, because I think that in those situations, we ought to take them seriously. Absolutely, 100%. Take them seriously, listen to women, make sure to gather all the evidence possible so that if, somebody who has abused them or assaulted them or whatever, can be brought to justice, absolutely 100%. Get them in the legal system, all that stuff. Get the woman to safe. But to just believe women just because they're women, That was a big part of the whole movement, was believe women because we're women. And I've known women who have said, well, you should believe me because I'm a woman. And I say, if it happened to you, I am desperately sorry, and it should never have happened to you. And that man should be in jail rotting right now. And you need help, and you need, therapy and someone to talk to. And absolutely, I am 100% down that for you. But I'm not going to condemn somebody. And I'm not going to say, condemn all these other people just because you said. But that's just what it made me think of, was that in our society, it's all about believe women all the time, no matter what, because I am female. And
right. Well, yeah. My thought is more like, if somebody comes is mentioning things that you don't just dismiss something, and you try, again, like I said earlier, your first thing should be, are you safe? Now, like if somebody whether you believe them or not, it's, are you safe? And I don't think that we, in any part, even for somebody in abuser, like we've had the podcast before where Lauren has talked about forgiving her abuser, and I believe so thoroughly that we should be reaching out to everybody, both sides of a situation. Whether you say this person should be rotting in jail, we still need to be reaching out to them and bringing them Jesus. So that's
absolutely.
Well, and I think that was also one of those times, kind of like originally the Me Too movement was supposed to show people that happens more often than they think it does.
That was the original intent,
and then people started twisting it. And I think that's been you're talking about the media, and anybody, nowadays the media is not just the news. It's whoever wants to put, it's us. We're on a podcast right now,
believe us.
It's whoever can get followers to listen, somebody to listen to them, and online, and it's a lot easy. We have easy access now with the internet and everything. So I don't want to also diminish the Me Too movement, because its original point was to show that abuse happens more often than most people think it does. But I also agree with you that we shouldn't. I was raised with brothers. Boy, girl drama is a lot more. It took me a long time to get used to, when I started having friends that were girls, getting used to girl drama. And boys have their own drama too.
I was going to say, in my house, the boys.
but it's different. It's different. But girls lie, and boys lie.
Humans lie.
Humans lie. And so to say that I'm a girl, so you should believe me, or I'm a woman, so you should believe me. I agree with you that's.
I don't think that we should believe someone on the basis of whether they have a penis or vagina alone. Yeah. However, I think that if we, like you said, Stacy, you brought a really good point to that we need to understand the reason why a movement like that would start. Because some little girl somewhere went to her mother and said, this man is abusing me. And that woman did not believe her. And this is where we shrink it down for ourselves right now. As women, we need to start believing each other.
And that's that solidarity.
On a micro scale, we need to be able to look at each other and believe each other when we're saying that we're hurt, instead of minimizing each other. This is how we start. This is how we change the narrative. We start by, the Me Too movement never would have had to happen if children could come to their parents. This is where it started. Go back and look at all the original stories. It's all about kids telling their parents that someone famous or powerful, or God forbid, daddy, did something to them, and mom didn't believe them. So as mothers, as women, on a micro scale, when our nieces, when our daughters, when our friends, when our teenage girls in our youth ministry are saying things, we need to go and listen and have the mindset of believing children. This is where it starts.
Children especially.
This is where it starts. And so that's what I mean about let's go all the way back to why someone started that movement, which I truly believe was probably a good thing. at its, because in Hollywood, I mean, we saw what happened, how much good came out of the Me Too movement. Mm-hmm. A lot of terrible things came out of it too. But look how many of these very famous, very established Hollywood directors and actors were exposed for the disgusting and vile behavior that had, until that moment, nobody thought they could touch them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it's always that way. There's always like this flip of the coin where there's this good stuff that happens and there's this bad stuff that happens. But I think unearthing it down to the practical aspect of how can I change society? It's when we look at our daughters and the women that are around us in our generation, and we say to each other, I will believe you. I will defend you. Even if it gets somebody really important in trouble. Mm-hmm. Like, do you know what I mean?
It goes back to what feminism originally was that empowering
arms.
women. And I don't mean, but like women walking together for the betterment of society as a whole, not just betterment for me. Because I think that's, when we get down to it in this whole conversation, the modern feminist movement is about me.
Yes, absolutely.
Me. When the original feminists were about society. The world. They had
bigger, and that's what I meant when I was saying that. I did not mean to diminish what you were saying about clothing. What I meant was, why is that our conversation when it's the world that needs women? Like the larger picture, that's where this is where I say that, like, when we break it down into these little tiny vignettes, we're actually not accomplishing anything. But when we link arms together as women and say, we are each other and we have to help each other, then this whole horizon opens up. So it's not that that's not important. I hope that it didn't come across that way or to be dismissive. And if it did, I apologize. I just feel like there's bigger conversations than what men think about what I'm wearing. Like, and I know that's not what you were saying, but that was what I was responding to. But I understand now when you clarified what you were saying makes perfect sense. It's beautiful. It's a very important point.
And I must be an idealist because, like, you know, Laura, when you mentioned, like, it all comes down to, like, us believing, you know, or supporting, like, that when they come to you, I'm like, and what it comes down to me is that we have a world where it's unthinkable that the abuse happens in the first place.
Right.
and raising up our families so that doesn't happen. But I know my ideal.
I think it's scary. It's scary when stuff like this happens. You know, we all know what's happened in the church. And I think that it's really scary to see these things come closer to home. And what we want to do is turn our eyes and pretend that, no, that's not going to happen here. It's not going to happen to my friend. It's not going to happen to, my friend's husband isn't abusing her. That good Catholic man, there's no way. Dude, it happens. And the more we shut our eyes and the more we pretend that it's not, the more it will continue.
It happened in my family. Like, yes, I know this.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's happened to friends. And, we have to stop trying to protect victimizers no matter who they are. And that's the song that women in the church need to sing.
Well, and in terms of being an idealist, like, I think it's important to understand that just because you're confirmed in the church, it's not like this magic wand that's waved and all of your sins are erased and you are now a walking saint. We are human beings.
Right. There's always going to be sin.
Yeah, there's always going to be sin. And so it's something that takes work, because I know that for me, like, just because I know somebody who's Catholic or, there's a priest or whatever, just putting on a program or something, like, I'm not going to leave my child alone with somebody who I don't know because there's someone I don't know. It doesn't matter if they're Catholic or not or whoever.
Right. It's common sense, Yeah.
So all of this made me think of Edith Stein.
Well, of course.
And so in three of her saints, Teresa Benedicta of the Cross,
a Carmelite.
So 3 quotes from her just came to me through while you 3 were hashing out what you're saying, but I'm going to kind of string them together. So these are actually 3 different quotes, but women naturally seeks to embrace that which is living, personal, and whole, to cherish, guard, protect, nourish, and advance growth in her natural maternal yearning. And a woman's soul, this is the second quote, and the woman's soul is fashioned as a shelter in which other souls may unfold. Which brings me to the one that I thought of first. The world doesn't need what women have. The world needs what women are. I think that kind of sums that perfectly, that we're not meant to be used. Feminism needs to stop looking at itself as an individual movement, but feminism at its heart is helping the world see what women are.